Hello and welcome to Ponder Policy. Today we're going to be talking about RFK Jr.'s presidential run and where I believe he's going to be accruing the highest percentage of the vote share. Not that any polls currently show him able to win the presidential race or even favored to win a single state, but this video will be focusing on where I think RFK Jr. will be performing the best, and that'll be for a variety of reasons. But let's just jump in. I think the first example I'd like to bring up is the state of Minnesota, because this state has sort of a Ventura conservative base where Minnesota elected a Reform Party governor as the Reform Party was entering decline, I believe in the late 90s. And while Ventura didn't end up being RFK Jr.'s VP pick, he was on the short list. And I think RFK might have some residual support there from many voters, and I think 538 aggregate has him at roughly 10% currently, which is maybe above the national average for his polls. But I think Minnesota might be a good state for RFK, where unlike many other states, I think he may be actually helping Biden in the state, because a lot of those otherwise independents would otherwise be voting for Trump, and those would be your Ventura conservatives. Now it is important to note that RFK does not have ballot access in all 50 states yet. He is in large part expected to either have all 50 states or a large majority of them have ballot access, but he does not yet in Minnesota. I don't think there's going to be some large thing stopping him from getting on the ballot in the state, and I think he may perform well there. Trump pointed out in a recent rally in the state, a fundraising event, that he actually leads Biden or is tied with Biden in the state when RFK isn't on the ballot, but Biden is up by roughly 2 when RFK is included. So I think Minnesota is a good choice for RFK doing well. I think he's going to outperform the national average in this state. And I think the other place where he's going to outperform the national average is in Maine's 2nd district. Now, this is actually for a slightly different person, but similar reason, that instead of Ventura and the Reform Party, it would be the person who started the Reform Party, when Perot in 1992 actually nearly won the district. And Perot, I think, is also a centrist, ran for president, most successful third-party president in recent history, actually was leading in certain polls come around summer of that election season, briefly dropped out of the race and finished with about 19% of the popular vote. I don't think RFK is going to get up to those numbers. I think he might be hovering around maybe just below 10%. Which is going to be very good for a third-party candidate, but I don't think he's going to win a single electoral vote. Maine's 2nd district, though, had a large amount of Perot support. This is a much more rural and more anti-establishment area of the country, along with this entire northeast region. I mean, New Hampshire, Vermont, I think, might also be more inclined to vote for Robert F. Kennedy. And the thing that these three also have in common is people might believe they have some sort of luxury vote where the state is almost assuredly going to be voting for one candidate or the other. New Hampshire is a bit tighter, but I think it's polling more heavily towards Biden. But of all the three, and as a general national trend to address, in swing states, voters in polls expressing dissent or disagreement with either Trump or Joe Biden as their candidate may poll saying they're going to vote for a third party, but a lot of that support evaporates on election day as voters realize that they're picking between the more electable or able to become president, lesser of two evils, whereas in more safe states, that trend doesn't happen as much because voters see themselves as having what is called a luxury vote, and the state is very much decided, and they can vote for RFK with little consequence to the actual whoever wins the state. And I think the other region where Kennedy may do well is Arizona, New Mexico. And while Arizona is a swing state, and I think a lot of his support might diminish on election day, I think these two states you might have some libertarian support that comes to RFK from Chase Oliver being the Libertarian nominee, and sort of New Mexico especially, which in 2016 had a huge pull for Gary Johnson. Even though RFK Jr. isn't a libertarian, he does have some more anti-establishment or small government ideals. He did speak at the Libertarian National Convention not too long ago, and I think he might do well in the state, especially New Mexico, because sort of that anti-establishment base, even though it might be a little divided between various candidates, Trump, RFK, potentially the Libertarian nominee. I think you also get a luxury vote because New Mexico is polling more heavily towards Biden, at least right now. And Arizona, I think you have similar reasons for that. In 2016, you also did have some Johnson support sort of hold up in the state. But Kennedy has done, he's the only major presidential candidate in recent history, to my knowledge, that I can think of, that has made express efforts to win over Native American reservations or Native American communities, which Arizona does have a lot of. And I wouldn't be surprised if RFK may even win over the reservations in Arizona, especially, just because he's the only candidate who's reached out to those communities. Other areas where I think Kennedy might pull a good amount of support, I think you have sort of this Great Plains region, I don't know really what else to call it, where sort of this anti-establishment sentiment is very strong. It's most assuredly going for Trump in 2024, but Kennedy still maintains some of that support, especially positions on the role, like individual freedoms and freedom of speech, medical freedoms. Those issues do well here. I think the other reason I would include this is because you might have some residual support from the Reform Party, where Buchanan actually pulled a few percentage points across these territories in 2000, and they also, when the Reform Party was a bit more on the conservative side, and because these states, because these states are very solid for Trump, Republicans might have a luxury vote for Kennedy if they disagree with any of Trump's positions or policies, or just want to express some kind of dissent. I think Kennedy can do well in this area. In terms of other places where Kennedy might have some pull, I think Alaska, Colorado, California. California, sort of that luxury vote belief where Biden might not be approved by all the Democrats in these states, but it's definitely going to be voting for Biden come 2024. So Kennedy might be able to pick up a large number of voters from those groups that are more disaffected by both parties. Like, they're Democrats, but they're certainly not going to vote for Trump, but they don't really want to vote for Biden. I think Kennedy can do well in those two states. And Alaska has been very independent recently. You've seen Democrats who are pro-individual freedoms, more conservation-focused, pro-gun, do well in the state. And it's also just been, I think independents have moved up to be the largest voter registration of more so than Democrats and Republicans in Alaska recently. So that would kind of be the demographic that RFK appeals to. Now, RFK, in his campaign, has made early efforts at minority communities in Georgia and North Carolina. Obviously, any major presidential candidate is going to be targeting swing states, and these are some of the closest margin states. But they haven't really been sticking, and he's underperforming in polls in these two states. So It is questionable if he's going to pick up any support there. Voters, in large part, especially in swing states, have their minds made up, and polling isn't moving all that much, even after major news or happenings. So I don't see RFK actually doing well compared to his national average in these two states. But I think moving on, I think the place that he's actually going to do worst in the country is the D.C. metro area, where his entire platform is very anti-establishment. So Maryland, D.C., Northern Virginia, even Virginia at large, I think is going to have a general rejection of RFK. These were areas which had a lot more support for Haley over Trump. Haley actually won D.C. along with Vermont. And they're much more establishment Republicans. I think Vermont is up there because you have more anti-establishment, especially with Bernie Sanders, anti-establishment, anti-NAFTA liberals, or I guess left-leaning voters in the case of Vermont. But I think RFK is going to definitely underperform in these three states. I'm counting D.C. as a state. I think the Rust Belt is certainly interesting because RFK, at least in polls right now, is doing okay in these three states, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. But I think that trend with not having a luxury vote and voters getting to the polls and really deciding that there's only two candidates who can reasonably win the contest on election day. So I think a lot of the RFK support in these three states might evaporate on election day. And I believe recently Ohio actually will be allowing Biden on the ballot. There was some issue with his filing. If Biden wasn't on the ballot, I would predict RFK doing very well here, because a lot of Democrats who don't see Biden on the polls, you would have, even though a large portion of them would probably write him in, I think a large portion would also vote for Kennedy in sort of a Trump versus Kennedy matchup in the state. But I believe, at least recently, Biden is likely to get onto the ballot in Ohio, so that's not really an issue. Even though Kennedy is very pro-conservation, I don't think that's going to carry him statewide in Washington, Oregon, the Pacific Northwest area, just because you have those larger urban centers in Seattle, Portland, that sort of control state politics to a large degree. He may do well for the same reason he does in the Great Plains and sort of eastern Oregon, but that doesn't apply to the state as a whole. Perot, going back to 92, this is sort of your residual independent centrist support across the country, did do very well in Nevada, but this is also a shifting state. A lot of demographics have changed as people have come over, moved en masse from especially California. And I think also just being a swing state, RFK won't enjoy as much support as people will be not enjoying that luxury vote for the same reason that the Rust Belt suffers for that reason. Other than that, I think just large population states, New York, even like I highlighted California, but even California, Texas, Florida, you're just going to need so many more voters to change the percentage in the final results that it's probably more difficult for third parties to make large percentage gains in those four states like Illinois too, Pennsylvania. And while RFK may be doing well in certain polls and certain demographics, I don't really see that amounting to a large enough percentage to change the state's politics so heavily come election day. But those are generally my thoughts. I think these are going to be the areas where Kennedy does the best of all states. And thank you for watching.